You ever got to that situation where you start watching something, you've seen perhaps the ads pop up, and then you think, oh, I wonder what that's like, and then 4 hours later, you're halfway through season 1. Well, that was the situation I found myself in, looking at a New Zealand-made program called Testify, set in Auckland. It is the story of a rich, powerful mega church family and, the underbelly of what Pentecostal church looks like in Auckland, at least through the fictitious lens of this particular show. Joining me on the program is somebody who is, interested in media depictions of faith, shall we say. Dr. Michael Frost, Auckland-based theologian and host of the Shift podcast. Kia ora, good morning. Thanks for your time today.
Kia ora, thanks for having me.
Honestly, these are several hours I'll never get back in my life. And look, I'm not just saying this because I'm an offended Christian and they maligned me in the program, although that's true. But it's just terrible television, not particularly well written. And Michael, honestly, it's your fault that I watched it, because I knew that we were going to have a chat about this one. For people that haven't seen it, bless them, give us a summary. What's this show all about?
Yeah, I should say it's my fault you started watching it. It's your fault you kept watching it.
Exactly.
You should say that.
I take that blame.
Look, I think it's clear that what's happening here. You know, I like you said, I'm always so curious when pop culture reflects back to the church, maybe what it thinks, what it perceives, what it sees, and this is certainly one of those examples.
Yep.
And it's telling this story. It's clearly drawing on various news stories that have come up in the last 3, 4, 5 years, in particular in this part of the world. I think we've tended to see sort of televangelist scandal as being a uniquely American problem. And then in the last few years, we've had various ones of these large kind of Pentecostal mega churches having some, let's say, less positive stories in the news about some stuff that's gone on. And so all of that's kind of been packed into this one tale of a fictional Auckland megachurch called A Vow, complete with spinning kind of logos and dance crews and charismatic leaders.
I did think it was interesting it was called A Vow because, has the same number of letters as Arise, for example. Not that subtle in that regard, although it is perhaps, if you were trying to and I did this as I was watching it going, which megachurch are they picking on at the moment? It is a mashup of several different styles. It's not close enough to be libelous, as it were.
No. I think, there's clearly some Destiny references in there. There's clearly some Arise references in there. There's probably even a little bit of Hillsong stuff in there too. So there's a bit of a mixture of all of that, isn't there? Sort of jammed into the 1 7-day period.
And it all does happen quite quickly. Yes, churches, like any organization, they have their crises, they have their good guys and bad guys, they do some things they shouldn't, but all this happens in a week for one family. Busy people.
Yeah. Way too much time on their hands, I think. But obviously. So maybe, I've never written a TV show, so obviously they felt they had to sort of intensify and heighten, every possible story thread they could, sort of all at once. So there's about sort of 27 different plot lines to follow.
Exactly.
As you go along.
Maybe it should have been called Intensify rather than Testify. It would have certainly been.
That would have been
more accurate.
Maybe.
Having said that, though, to be fair, Michael, the tropes that they're picking on are actually all things that have happened in a church near you within the last few years, for the most part. So you could say you couldn't make this up. Well, in some cases, they didn't have to, and certainly this may be, if not an accurate representation of parts of the body of Christ, then an accurate representation of how people outside of the church see the church.
That's right. The only reason a show can get at least some traction is because it's pulling on stuff that people are like, I've heard of that kind of thing happening, right? It's not, and that's a concern for us, right? And so we can either react in ways that say, oh, this is unfair, this is not how we really are, and so on, or we can, approach it with more curiosity than that and say, okay, what's being seen here by those beyond the church that we need to pay attention to and recognize that although in our little bubbles we might feel like we're all patting each other on the back and doing a great job, we might be missing some stuff more broadly that we need to really seriously reflect on.
It does, perhaps, and I'm not sure if this is target audience, it reinforces what may be existing stereotypes and prejudices from people who have perhaps had a bad experience with the church, or have perhaps come to the generalization that all Christians are homophobic, for example, or all Christians are hypocrites. This is people's lived experience. And so this type of show could be ticking all the boxes, reinforcing, see, I knew they were all like that.
Yeah, it could, and it probably is. And again, I think the response that lands with the church is to say, okay, so what do we do about that?
Yeah.
And either we can sort of say, no, we're not like that. And I just don't know that that's a particularly fruitful avenue.
Yeah.
Because it reinforces the message itself that we think we're great, but what about all of this harm that people are seeing?
Yeah.
And so I think there's probably a slow approach for the church here, which is to say, if we really want to change that story, then we do need to, in the ways that we can, pay attention to where the church has caused harm, especially if that's shown to be a broader problem than just that one bad guy did that thing.
Yeah.
But actually, no, we're seeing some systemic stuff in certain forms of the way we build our institutions. Then really the only way to change that story is to take that on the chin and go, okay, well then let's do better.
It is, of course, also possible, and I know for some people this is the way to go in this regard, is to go, well, it's not us, it's them. It's not, I'm not that type of Christian. It's these big mega churches. And for people that don't go to a mega church, they may be thinking, oh, yes, that is what's happening in some churches, but not ours. Aren't they terrible for giving us a bad reputation? Pointing the fingers at others, pointing out the log of wood in somebody else's eye, etc.
Yeah, it's always easier to say it's the problem of the guys down the road and not us. We'd never do something like that or whatever. And I guess, perhaps the only way to determine, is that the case, is to talk to the people with openness who leave our communities.
Yeah.
And instead of sort of pushing all of the blame onto them, listen and hear. And sometimes it'll be, I want it to be lead worship, pastor, and you never let me, and that's fine. That's just any community has to wrestle with that stuff. But sometimes we'll hear ways in which people have been genuinely harmed. And if we start to see patterns of that kind of stuff, if we're open to it, right, to that conversation without judgment, then we get to see, okay, are we who we think we are? And that's a good question to be asking, I think.
Certainly a good question to be asking. And Michael, if there's any sign of hope, I suppose, within the series so far, and I noticed this quite early in the first episode, the good guys in this scenario, they seem to be living in an inner city apartment, and their only source of income is a podcast. So for podcasters such yourself, maybe either that's a sign of hope or it's a sign of just how inaccurate some of the plots are for this particular series.
Yeah, no, I haven't made enough off my podcast to fund an inner city apartment. That's for sure.
Exactly.
With the amount of space they have too, extraordinary.
Well, yeah, no, it's quite a fancy apartment. Hey, we certainly appreciate your commentary on this. I'm going to call it, I wouldn't recommend this particular series, but perhaps what I would recommend is asking the question about some of these tropes, some of these stereotypes. Are they true about our Christian community? Is this the way other people see us? And what can we do to perhaps change that, or at least push back in the opposite direction? Michael, thank you for your time today.
Hey, thanks so much.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.